little unusual for all of us. I'm going to wait until the clock officially turns over to 4 o'clock so that we're not jumping the gun. Clock says it's 4 o'clock, so let us convene the August 21st, 2023 Charlottesville City Council meeting. Ms. Thomas, would you call the roll, please?
Councilor Payne?
Here.
Councilor Pinkston?
Here.
Councilor Puryear?
Here.
Mayor Snook?
Here.
Vice Mayor Wade?
Here.
Okay, we're all here. Is there a motion to approve or to amend the agenda?
So move. Second.
I guess we're back to voting. Please cast your vote. Okay, motion passes. This meeting will be divided, as always, into 3 sections. First will be a work session where we will hear presentations that do not require a council vote. Then we'll have a closed session. Typically, we go into closed session about 5:30 and then come back to the City Council business meeting typically around 6:30. That will be, if anybody's watching on Zoom, there is a different Zoom link for the business meeting. So on the 4 o'clock agenda today, we have 3 presentations. The first one is going to be on ranked choice voting, and Taylor Yell to present. Or Jim Nix or others. Some collection of you are welcome to speak to us.
So are you ready now?
Yeah.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor Snook, City Councilors, Mr. Sanders. My name is Jim Nix. I'm the Secretary of the Charlottesville Electoral Board. My 2 board colleagues are here, John Bright, who's the chair of the board, and Bob Hodis, who's vice chair. And of course, Taylor Yowell is also here. She's our Director of Elections and General Registrar. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss with you the opportunity or the potential for introducing ranked choice voting in Charlottesville elections. As you're probably aware, in 2020, in the session of the legislature in 2020, a bill was passed to allow ranked choice option for city council and board of supervisors elections throughout the state. It was introduced by our own delegate, Sally Hudson, and it passed both houses and was signed by the governor. Now, there is a history, some history of ranked choice voting in Virginia. There have been a couple of firehouse primaries, including one here in Charlottesville in 2011 that Mayor Snook is certainly aware of. He was a key participant in that. Yes,
I counted
indeed.
the votes for it.
Well, that was fun. I was there too. And of course, more recently, the Republicans used the ranked choice system for nominating their statewide candidates for governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general most recently in I guess it was 21. Bills to expand ranked choice to other offices have been introduced in the last 2 or 3 sessions, but none has passed. But I'm sure we'll see additional bills introduced in the next session in January. Now, the bill was passed in 2020, and it is in effect until 2031. They put a 10-year, it starts in 2021, ends in 2031. Not sure why they did that. But as it stands now, it's temporary, and I think they were waiting to see what experience there was. And there has been some. Arlington, in the June 20th primary, conducted a ranked choice election for 2 supervisor positions. Now, this was important experience for us to look at because it was a multi-winner race with 2 winners. Now, it appears to have been successful. The process worked as intended. The results were published quickly, actually too quickly, but we don't need to go into that. The outcome was clear and unchallenged, and public satisfaction was high based on the results of some online surveys that were done. However, in the weeks following that election, some objections were raised to the tabulation method used. People didn't understand the computer program that produced by the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center to tabulate the votes in a multi-winner race. And so based on those concerns that were raised there, the County Board of Supervisors voted not to use ranked choice for the fall general election. And it remains up in the air as to whether they'll do it in future elections or not. It was interesting, Arlington had 6 candidates, and the equipment they use allows them to, the voters to select 3, to rank three choices. Our equipment here, Hart Verity equipment, allows for 6 rankings, so ours is a somewhat superior system, I think. Of the 6 candidates, the 2 that placed first in the initial round of vote counting were the first and third candidates, and in the final, the first and second in the initial round turned out not to be the winners. It was the first and third that ended up the winners at the end after the succeeding rounds of vote tabulation, which is interesting because the candidates there were split. Apparently the community is very split on some zoning issues, and I don't know the details, and I don't know which candidates favored which side in that. But in the initial round of voting,
there's an object lesson there.
in the initial voting, in the initial round of vote tabulation, it was candidates on one side that were in the lead. But by the time tabulation was finished, the first and third place winners were candidates that represented both sides of that issue. So it was kind of an interesting result. So that's a little basic background. I'll now pass the podium to Taylor, who will give you a presentation on exactly what ranked choice is and how it works, particularly the tabulation method used for multi-winner races.
Mr. Nix, would it be fair to say that what we have now is first past the post? Is that a term?
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
what we have now. Okay.
Yeah.
So the 2 first past the.
So in a 3-winner race, as we have this year, the 3 getting the maximum, the highest number of votes win. It's not so clear. That's only the first round. That would only be the first round in a ranked choice election. So I'll pass it to Taylor now, and she'll show you some technical stuff about ranked choice voting and how the tabulation system works, and then I'll come back at the end with some follow-up comments.
Thank you.
Taylor?
All right. So I have a presentation I think that is going to be shared. Here we go. All right, so like Jim talked about, we are going to discuss ranked choice voting and specifically for multi-winner elections. So this would be in reference for the first available opportunity would be for the June 2025 primary, where we would have 2 seats open. So just discussing, today we're going to talk about what is ranked choice voting, how does ranked choice voting work for 2+ winners, what would the next steps be moving forward if that is something that you all as council would like to implement, and any questions that we can answer. So for a basic understanding, what is ranked choice voting? Instant runoff voting or ranked choice voting is a voting system where a voter can rank their ballot sequentially in order of preference rather than just getting a single or limited number of candidates for their choice of winner. If your first choice cannot win or does not get the most number of votes, then your first choice, who was your first choice, ended up coming in last on the initial round. Then your ranking, what you would go and use your second choice ranking would then become your first, and so on and so forth. How does it work? So again, voters would have the option to rank candidates in order of their preference. In Charlottesville, we use Hart InterCivic as our voting vendor, so you could have up to 6 rankings for each voter. If no candidate reaches the election threshold on the initial round, and I will come back to what the election threshold is in a couple of slides, the last place candidate is eliminated, and that voter's second place votes are redistributed to the remaining candidates. The process will continue until a winner has earned over the election threshold. So how does ranked choice voting work for 2+ winners? So again, exactly the same as if it was just one winner. All voters would have the choice to rank their candidates to their choosing up to 6 choices. The instructions on the ballot and that we will recite to all voters will inform the voter of how many candidates are up for nomination in a primary or up for election in a general. And the votes are allocated using the inclusive Gregory method of reallocation. So this means that a percentage of the vote will be applied to their next choice. We'll also talk about this later on. All candidates who will cross the election threshold will earn a seat or nomination. So, we talked about the election threshold a little bit. So this is the number of votes that you need in order to earn a seat or win the election. So, for example, in 2025, we will have 2 seats open, which means that the election threshold is going to be 33.3% of the votes plus 1. The logic behind this is that there are 2 seats open, 3 candidates cannot win 33.3% of the vote plus 1 additional vote. So if in the first round, 1 person gets 34% of the vote, 2 more cannot beat them. So that means that they have met the election thresholds. And for example, if you were doing ranked choice voting this year, it would be 25% plus 1. In a single seat election, it would be 50% plus 1, and so on and so forth. But again, this is just the method of getting to that number. So the total number of ballots cast would be divided by the number of seats to be filled plus 1 seat. And then you would add 1 vote to that total, and that gives you the election threshold. All right, so here we have an example of a graph on ranked choice voting. So this is just what you would get on election night. On election night, all you receive are the first round results. So in the first round, you are going to have your first color. They end up getting 40% of the vote. The election threshold here is it's a 2-seat election, so it's 33.3%. That's what that dotted line is. And once anything over that 33.3%, which is 7%, will then be able to be reallocated and redistributed in a surplus fraction as well. So, surplus fractions. If a candidate exceeds the election threshold, so that 33.3%, a fraction of the votes that are for all of the first round of whoever voted for that candidate that came in first, that met the election threshold in the first round, then can be redistributed. So for example, the candidate's total number of votes minus the election threshold would then be divided by the candidate's total number of votes, which equals the surplus fraction. So to break it down simpler, 33% was the election threshold, 40% is who met the threshold in the first round. There's a difference of 7. So 7% of anyone that voted for the person that went out in the first round because they met the threshold, 7% of their second round vote is then transferred and able to be tabulated. So we've got it here. It takes, in the graph, if you're looking at that 33%, the redistributed 7% is, not sure why, I actually borrowed this graph from another party, but no one voted for the apricot or rust color in their second round vote. 3% of who voted in turquoise were redistributed to the chartreuse, 2% were to navy, and 2% were to plum. And that redistribution, none met the threshold as well. So you will go on and do another round, and the next round means that the person that was in last, which is plum, is then redistributed forward. Maybe. Here we go. All right, so now the plum has been redistributed forward, so you will take their second round vote, and that would be their entire second round vote is then redistributed forward and reallocated. So again, using this, none have met the threshold still, so you're going to do a next round. So the next round is the navy, and that was redistributed, so we now have 2 winners, and so since 2 candidates have met the threshold, this would be the completion of tabulation.
So just
Yes.
one back.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
Nope.
So, so why the turquoise didn't get the plum? It's because no one in plum voted for turquoise?
So this one could be that no one in plum voted for turquoise, or it's also just not tabulated because it's an exhausted vote. Turquoise has already met the threshold. So you do not have to tabulate that any longer.
Okay, I got it.
More questions on this?
I'm
Yes,
random. I'm curious. So there's software that would tabulate all this automatically.
Correct.
What is that process like to kind of verify if someone raised objections to the tabulation?
can I come back to you
Yes.
on that? We'll talk about that. That's one of our concerns as well, so we'll get back to that one. All right. Do we know if we're able to play that video link in the bottom right corner?
I'm not sure if your clicker will do that.
I know we can't from here,
Okay.
but whether
Looks
you
like
can
David is
controlling
trying
it
to
from there, I
make
don't
it
know.
slow.
It looks like David's trying to do it for you.
Perfect. If you can, it's just a quick little video to explain this in much better terms than I can use.
Vote for your favorite colors.
Oh, we got the audio. Do we have video goes with it?
He might have to share his screen.
Or if it's easier to come back at the end when we're out of the presentation as well.
Vote for
Ah,
Here we go.
Vote for your favorite colors.
The instant runoff way.
Now with fractions. We already showed you how instant runoff elections work when there's only one winner.
But when there's more than one winner, it's a little more complicated.
We have 5 colors to choose from, and we're going to end up with 3 winners.
To start, each voter chooses a favorite color, a second choice, and a third.
All right, purple is my first choice, yellow comes in second, and I'll put blue in third place.
Now we need a scoreboard. There were 36 votes cast. There will be 3 winners.
In order for a color to win, it needs more than a quarter of the vote. That's because if a color gets that much, then it's mathematically impossible for it to lose.
36 divided by 4 is 9, and we need just over that.
So plus 1 is 10.
10 votes is the finish line.
Make it there, and you're one of the 3 winners.
So let's count the votes.
No one's reached the finish line yet. That means it's time for round 2.
And orange got the fewest votes, so it's out.
Everyone who voted for orange first now gets their second choice.
Purple reached the finish line.
In fact, purple has more votes than it needs.
That means each purple voter can take back a fraction of their vote and still leave purple with enough to win.
Under instant runoff rules, that's exactly what they get to do.
Purple has 2 votes to spare,
And that gets divided among the 12 purple voters.
so each of them gets 1/6 of their vote back.
And that little piece will go to their next choice.
Now blue has reached the finish line,
No votes to spare.
so no more fractions. Green is in last place. You know the drill.
Most of these votes are for colors that have already won or are already out.
We call those ballots exhausted.
Yellow didn't quite make it to the finish line, but there's no one else left.
So we have our 3 winners.
The instant runoff way.
But that certainly is better for me, a visual type of person. But
Me too.
What I don't understand is, if you vote first and you don't win, and you distribute your second place vote, and it may put the first one over, and this example is 2 over. I don't understand why they have to distribute in percentages, what they have over.
So it does not. It only does that in multi-seat races. It does not in single-seat races, and the reason is because once that threshold has been met, you're not looking for another winner. So the logic in doing this for multi-seat races is that you're still getting. You might be a better one to help with this. You're still getting some say. So say if you chose in the first round, you chose the person that won first, you're still getting a percentage of an opinion, or that's how they like to say it, or a proportion of your vote to say what you. He's better at explaining this for you than others.
The reason this was done is it was felt that those who voted for the candidate who came in first in the first round of voting, there were extra votes for that person. And it was considered unfair that the second place choices of those people who voted for the most popular candidate would not be counted, whereas the second place choices for the least popular candidate would be counted. And the only way to do that, well, there's another way to do it, and that is you can randomly select certain ones and then redistribute those, which works if you have 36 votes, but not if you have 20,000 as we might have in Charlottesville. So it's just fairness to those who voted for the most popular candidate first.
Questions thus far? Can we? Okay. Good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So a few things to keep in mind are legal and funding considerations. So this only applies to city council races or your local governing body. So it's not any other local races, nothing statewide, nothing federal at this point. That could always expand, as Jim touched about. But as of right now, it would just be the one. So we would be discussing with voters, in a city council race, you vote this way. In school board race, you vote this way, so on and so forth, because they will be on the ballot at the same time. So just something to keep in mind. Outreach and educational costs. So we do believe that it would be somewhat significant of an outreach cost and education cost, not necessarily for software equipment or anything, but just because of educating voters. So for example, if we decided to do any sort of mailers out to the general public, then that will cost anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 per mailing that we do. And can always go up from there if when it's time to start promoting and doing outreach events, our staff, it's going to be pretty significantly cost in having them staff it for overtime, anything of the sort. I know discussing with Arlington, they did a lot of events in the evenings or on the weekends, and they did it for 6 months leading up to the election. It's not just something you can do for the month prior. It's a very significant amount of time, as well as HART upgrade. So upgrading our voting systems to 2.7. We are currently on 2.52 in the city of Charlottesville. It will probably cost around $4,000. Not a huge expense, but the reason we would want to upgrade to 2.7 is that is what will be used in California. They're piloting 2.7 with HART and with ranked choice voting in California, so that way we'll know it's already been used, it has been tested. So prior to doing this, we would definitely want to make that move. It's an optional upgrade, but I would highly suggest making sure we move forward to that. And also for ballot printing, we expect it to be significantly higher to print ballots only because it will not fit on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, which means with the specs of ballots that we have to have with the weight and brightness and everything of the sort, it will significantly increase our cost in ballots. Possible next steps for the city. So it would be up to council to draft, introduce, and pass the ordinance for ranked choice voting. We do suggest getting this done sooner rather than later, and our reasoning is because if this is something that you would want to do, 2024 is a presidential year. We are not going to be able to focus our efforts on doing any form of outreach until the presidential election is over. So we need to know as soon as the presidential is over if this is something we're potentially going to be doing in June. We would have to start outreach right away. So it's just something for us to be able to know now, or whether that's January or this coming spring. The sooner the better, absolutely, for our office would be a lot more helpful, and as well as for the general public. And then the other major thing is developing an educational and outreach plan. After discussing with other registrars, other localities, according to the administrative code, it is actually up to our governing body to handle all form of outreach for ranked choice voting. It is not up to the Office of Voter Registration. It is up to the governing body. So, and the reasoning is because you all have to explain to voters and explain to the residents why this is something that we're doing. We cannot explain why. Our job is to answer how it is done and what is ranked choice voting. It would be your responsibility to explain why we are doing this. So we would be happy and are welcome and willing, of course, to do these outreach events, but we would request that at least one person from council would be present at all of them. So that way, what we cannot answer, you all would be able to answer.
So the buck has been passed by statute.
It has, yes. Very much so. All right, so concerns. Going back to Councilor Payne, what you were saying earlier. Certified versus approved tabulation software. We drafted a letter from our office back in January to you all explaining some of the concerns that we have with ranked choice voting. It is not our job and not something that we will be a part of in regards to saying why we should not support or implement ranked choice voting. Our job is to give you, okay, this is how it's going to work. A lot of the concerns that we addressed in that letter in January have been answered. A lot still have not. One of the major concerns that we have is that the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center is the tabulation software that the state has contracted with that is going to be tabulating all of the election results after election night. So our equipment will tabulate the very first round. After that first round, all of the information is compiled and it is input into the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. And the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center is what will give us the final output data. That is not something that we have any form of hand in after that very initial round. And it is only approved software, it is not certified software. So in the Virginia code, it is stated that all hardware and software attached to hardware is required to be certified. So for example, our EPBs are required to be certified, our scanners are required to be certified, but this is not required to be certified, so it is not.
What kind of practical implications does that have?
So it's been used, it's used in multiple places. The concern that we have is a potential lawsuit down the road. You know, if someone were to question the election results, it could just be, don't want to say it too rough, but it could be a sore loser and they say, well, how do I know this didn't work? There's not a good way to hand count a multi-seat election. You saw with the percentages. I don't know how to successfully hand count a multi-seat election where you're not subject to human error or anything of the sort. If something were to go to court and it were to get thrown out, we are not sure what the legal implications would be for that. Standards for transposing hand count ballots. So ballots are hand counted if you have an overseas voter, if you have a print disabled voter, they can receive a ballot via email, they can print it out, they can fill that out, and they can mail it back to our office. Virginia does not allow the accepting of electronic ballots, but we can issue electronic ballots. So the ballots that we receive back that we have sent out electronically cannot be scanned. We hand count them afternoon on election day. Well, ranked choice voting requires all ballots to have a cast vote record, which means it has to be scanned, which means that we would need to transpose the hand count ballots onto scannable ballots, and there is no information or no standard of how that needs to be done. So we need some sort of documentation, and this is from the Department of Elections, for saying how this needs to get done, so that way when you have observers and you have everyone in the room, we're not having a stack of ballots that we're just filling out and putting straight in the scanner. There needs to be some sort of oversight in this process. How to conduct a risk limiting audit or a recount with a multi-seat race. Again, this is what I was talking about with hand counts. Just this past...
What is a risk limiting audit?
Risk limiting audit, so it's an audit of the election. Each locality is responsible for handling one at least every 5 years. Our last one was in 2020 for the presidential election. So this is when the state... It could be statewide. It was in 2020. It was a statewide risk limiting audit. But it's when the state gets together, they get a pool of how many ballots that are going to be audited, and they give each locality the number of ballots that they're responsible for auditing. That way they'll pull all the data together, average it to see if that percentage of ballots comes to what Virginia's overall total was at the end. or from election day, the results. So it just audits our results on election day. And if it's not close enough, then you'll have a bigger pool that you will go through, and just so on and so forth. And if it stays off, then you would be required to do a recount.
As a practical matter, is that a check on the hardware? To make sure that the scanner is scanning correctly and?
Yes and no. So we have those. That is we do logic and accuracy testing prior to each election. So that is really our check on each of our scanners to make sure everything is scanning correctly. It is, I guess, a check on the scanners. Everything has to be done by hand for a risk limiting audit. You can't use anything that was output from a scanner, output from an electronic poll book or anything on election day.
Okay.
It is totally by hand, hence the problem with hand counting. But it's also just to verify the election results statewide as well. And then a recount. So for example, this past June, Prince William and Stafford had to do a recount for one of their delegates. I believe it was a delegate seat. That they had up, there was a 2-vote difference between that district. There was a 2-vote difference. Prince William was in the middle of doing the recount. They had an observer there saying that, no, you were not doing this accurately. It ended up going to court. The court decided that they had to do a full hand count of one precinct, and they said if the results do not come out the same, you will have to do a full hand count of all of the precincts. It did, but our concern is that if that were to happen, we would not know how to hand count in a situation like that if it were to arise, which means that it's not uncommon. It just happened this past June. It was a different scenario, but it could come out with the same effect. And then general elections and write-ins. So for general, if this were to be something you would implement, I would suggest starting with a primary because there are no write-ins in primaries. You're also, in Charlottesville, more likely to have more candidates on a primary ballot than you would a general election ballot. Not always the case, but definitely more highly likely for that to happen. And then I'm good for my part. What questions do you all have for me?
I have a question.
Yes.
You indicated when we were talking about cost, the cost for mailing, the cost to upgrade, the cost for ballot printing, and cost for staffing overtime. How many staff would you perceive that to be? And your ballot printing cost? I know that it can't be exact, but could you give a ballpark for each one of those?
Sure. So our staffing, it's 5 staff in our office total. I would not be included in that. So it'd be 4 staff members depending on an outreach event. Say, I know Arlington did 1 a week, and say if I had 2 staff members there and they ran for probably 4 or so hours, I would be at each of the outreach events, but I don't get overtime, so I do not matter.
Okay. And your ballot printing, you think?
So ballot printing, that is definitely variable, I will say. So right now, in order to cut costs, our office actually prints all ballots in-house. We do not purchase them.
Okay.
So right now, our ballot cost is under 10 cents a ballot, and that includes time, labor, staff. Our board actually takes the brunt of printing the ballots. And so we just have the purchase of, ink, the paper itself. If we were
Okay.
to purchase the ballots that we purchase now, they cost 38 cents per ballot. So it's a pretty significant difference when you're buying, between 20 and 30,000 per election. But purchasing, we are having a really hard time with our supply chain at the moment. So I don't know if we would be able to get the spec paper and brightness of the paper that we would need in the legal size, which means if we had to go to our vendor, it would be somewhere in the mid 40 cents. So I believe it was around 44 cents when I asked for a legal size ballot, the 8.5 by 14.
Okay. Why ranked choice voting?
That is not something that we can answer. We're here to tell you what it is and how it works.
Okay, thank
Why is up to you all.
Okay, thanks.
I did have a follow-up in this about the
Yes.
write-in ballots, and you were talking about the overseas. But over the last few years, we really have pushed mail ballots. So if someone mails a ballot, a lot of people mail it in.
Yep.
is that treated the same way as?
So mail-ins are not. So anyone on the permanent absentee list or that receives a ballot that is mailed out from our office, those are scannable ballots. It is just email ballots that are non-scannable, or if someone, for example, in a federal year, you can do a federal write-in absentee if their ballot never made it back to our office. We call them FWABs. But it's typically somewhere between 200 and 300 an election.
Okay. So
So-
that's, it won't.
No.
You still can encourage.
Yes,
if we
absolutely.
decide to.
Yeah, absolutely. The same ballots that go out via mail, they're not scannable on our in-person scanners, but they're scannable on what we use in order to tabulate the results. So it wouldn't be the between 2,000 and 3,000 we typically send out coming next month. It would not be all of those we had to transpose.
Let me say, one of the thoughts that I had as I was reading through all of this was that I did not understand, still don't understand, what happens with the inclusive Gregory method of reallocation.
That is better at answering this than me.
Yeah. That was mandated by the state as the method.
I
to
saw
use.
in the regulations it specified that. and
Yeah.
All I can say is that when Charlottesville Democratic Party did ranked choice voting back in 2011, we didn't do that.
No, we had quite a primitive method for tabulating votes back then, which is no longer considered acceptable. What was demonstrated in the video, where they were snipping the pieces of the Post-it notes of various colors, that's essentially the Gregory method. It's the partial reallocation, fractional reallocation of surplus votes for candidates that pass the threshold.
So just to use the example that they used, the first one got 40% of the vote and they only needed 33 or 33 1/3. So 6 2/3% of their vote was excess, exhausted.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out what happens with them, given that all of those voters already had a second choice, already had a third choice, which presumably got tabulated.
Right, well, those second choices for all of the voters who voted for that person who already won, they're counted, but then they're multiplied by 0.062, whatever, 67. So only a fraction of each vote is then is then allocated to the other candidates. So like I said, the other way to do it is just pick a random sample of those that accounts for the excess and reapportion those, but that's not really practical. So what they do is just the tabulation software counts up all those second choices and then takes a fraction of each one and allocates it to the remaining candidates.
Well, on the one hand, I'm inclined to say that from the voter's standpoint, it doesn't matter.
Right.
The voter doesn't need to know exactly how the computer is going to be doing what it's doing. The only people who are going to need to know are the conspiracy theorists who are convinced that there's something shady going on, or the computer science people who recognize that every program's got a bug.
Well, I think candidates need to know enough to be confident that the system works.
Well,
Yeah,
but there's nothing that a candidate or a voter will do differently as a consequence of whether you use an inclusive Gregory method of reallocation versus some other reallocation. I mean, the voter is still going to vote for their top choices, and the candidate, I remember when we were doing this 13 years ago, everybody was trying to figure out if there was a way to game the system.
Yeah, single shotting.
And nobody could figure out a way to game the system, which may be a good indication that it's a good system.
Yeah.
But it was people were convinced that there had to be some secret method that we weren't telling people about, and there just wasn't. My only concern is if I were, for example, if I were to be the counselor who was to go along with you on your education program, and somebody asked me how that worked, all I could say is, damned if I know.
Yeah, but see, you wouldn't have to answer that. That's a
We
question.
can answer that
goes to
part.
us.
Yeah, we can
But
answer
you
that
have-
part.
But when it comes to issues of pros and cons of ranked choice and why the council might have selected it, we'd have to pass to you to answer
Yeah.
those, why we're doing it.
And the simple answer is that particular issue was taken away from us anyway by the regulations.
Yeah, we have
by the
no
state
choice.
regs, yeah.
Yeah, it's all spelled out.
So I read somewhere just the headlines recently that the Washington D.C. Democratic Party sued over ranked choice voting, and I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know the details. You know, they had some issues with it, but it could have been, I'm not sure. But it'd be interesting to see what their issues were.
Yeah, there was a pretty thorough article in the Washington Post about that, and I think I have a clipping, I might even have it with me, but I think that the bottom line was that people who didn't win had some doubts about the system. And that kind of is what happened in Arlington as well, the objections that were raised later.
Sort of like the reason I don't go gambling, if I'm going to lose, I at least want to understand why I lost.
Yeah, good point.
So you mentioned Arlington's experience and that like the technical implementation, everything went well. What were the reasons that the board decided not to move forward using it in the general? Like, did they have any clear stated reasons?
There was concerns about the tabulation method and people not understanding it, and particularly candidates not understanding it and not being happy with it. I mean, the state imposed
Over
it
the
on-
reallocation kind of thing?
Yes,
Or-
yes, the fractional reallocation of surplus votes from the.
And I guess maybe fear over a lawsuit in response to that and kind of what proceeds from there?
Well, we have a fear of it. You know, the state has approved the software. What happened was the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center is one of the lead organizations, a nonprofit, that has worked on this for many years. They developed what they refer to as their universal tabulator, which is used for multi-winner races as well as single-winner races. And it's being used, it was used in New York, it was used, I think, in elections in Maine. It's been used a number of places. They offered it for free. They don't charge for it. However, Senate Bill 80 from 2 years ago said that outside organizations may not fund elections in the state of Virginia. And so they had to, the state had to get around this restriction from Senate Bill 80. And what they did was they insisted that Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center charge them for the universal tabulator. So they did. The state approved it for use in the state and purchased it and issues it to all jurisdictions that might want to use it at no cost. But our concern is they approved it. Does that mean if there was a legal challenge to the outcome of an election decided that way, that they would defend the software, or would we have to? And if it was certified by the state, the answer is easy. But approved and not certified, I mean, maybe it's only a semantic difference that means nothing. And the state would jump right in and help us out if we had a legal challenge from a losing city council candidate. But we don't know for sure.
Is there any kind of sense of timeline or process for what it takes to move to certified?
Well, they would have to do some
Yeah.
testing. And unfortunately, the person, what's her name, Karen?
So,
Yeah.
before we go into all that, I can tell you that the state is not planning on certifying it. We have asked, they said, by Virginia code, it is not a requirement, and so it will not be certified. It is it has been approved, I can't remember if it has been certified by the EAC, which is a federal oversight, but it has not been certified by the state of Virginia. And unless anything has changed within the last month in our conversations, it will not be certified in the state until that is ever a requirement.
But it has been used in a number of
Right.
localities, and as far as I know, there have been no challenges.
Correct.
So,
And then, I didn't realize this, was my understanding correct? You said earlier that the state law was for a 10-year period, so let's say the city adopted it in 2025 and the state law is not amended or changed, it would just stop being on the ballot. It couldn't be on the ballot anymore after 2031?
the option would go away in 2031 unless there was further action by the General Assembly. But there will be. I mean, this is an issue that is growing in popularity on both sides of the aisle. So we'll see bills introduced. In the last session, there were bills introduced to expand it to other local elections, House of Delegates and
Presidential primary.
And even presidential primaries, which would be probably a pretty good application of it. We had 14 candidates on the last one, so
But at least there, you're only coming out with one name, I guess.
much easier, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Single seats take away a lot of the issue with the transfer and the fractional surplus. So taking out the percentages, it makes tabulation a lot simpler.
So you had mentioned that in order, obviously, we're not going to have anything to implement during 2024. But refresh my recollection on the timeline that you would need a decision from council so that you could get geared up for doing something in 2025?
So the legal timeline is just 90 days out from an election, but as early in advance as you all would be wanting or able or anything of the sort. So for example, if it was something you know you wanted now and you want to say, I know my opinion's not going to change after council, everyone has gone through the November election and decided, okay, January, let's just go ahead and say for the June 2025 primary, we'll go ahead and approve this. Or if you wanted to wait until after the presidential primary, I would go ahead and have it on the agenda and approved as soon as the presidential election is over. So that would be November 24. So go December 2024 and get that approved as early as possible, because getting outreach and education to voters is going to be the most important thing. And having events, whether it's at the library, at our office, whether we do things at City Space, doing it as often and as much as possible to get as many of these materials out to them is going to be a huge factor in education, explaining it to voters and having them understanding what it is, how it works, so on and so forth.
So I assume that you do not intend to do any of that sort of effort until at the very least the day after the November 2024
Correct.
election.
Yes.
And so if we were to tell you early in 2024, you might have it in the back of your mind, but you're probably going to be pretty busy on other things and
Correct.
not really devoting much resources to
Yes,
it.
and the big reason for wanting it as early as possible is money as well, because this is going to be the same fiscal year as the November 24 election. And so that is where a lot of our money is allocated. And so if this is something that it's not decided until December 2024, and it's going to cost an extra $50,000, or it could cost as little as $10,000. There's no say that it's going to cost a significant amount, but I will not have that in the budget. If it does cost that extra $50,000, it's not going to be in our budget to be able to fund or to do as many things as possible. So if we wanted to do a mailer or something of the sort, it's not going to be in our office's budget to be able to just do that $20,000.
Okay. Folks, we have other things we've got to be talking about. Are we good for now?
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, our next item is the Charlottesville Area Alliance Annual Presentation with Kristen Miller and Susan Friedman. Charlottesville Area Alliance co-chairs to present.
Hi. How are you guys?
All right?
Good. My name is Kristen Miller, and as you just said, Sue Friedman and I are the new co-chairs for the Charlottesville Area Alliance. And I may or may not have some slides, but we'll just start going in case they're not. The Charlottesville Area Alliance vision is to become the most age-friendly community in the country. There we go. And let's see. There we go. And the mission is to lead the advancement of this vision with a focus on transportation, housing, and social participation. So, as you can see, the advocates, the CAA is made up of advocates, leaders, stakeholders, who work for a multitude of organizations and departments, and they all serve the senior population. Some provide direct services and resources, or govern and create policies like the City of Charlottesville. They all care about the health and welfare of the seniors in our area. So you can see there are quite a variety of organizations that belong to CAA. So 1 in 5 people are considered, that's what we consider seniors, age 65 or older, and 1 in 5 are of this group in the Blue Ridge Health District. They are the fastest growing segment of the population. So this age-friendly, what is age-friendly? So age-friendly is good for everybody. Plan for the needs of the aging population, and we automatically check off the needs of all constituents. So I'm going to read a little something. So this is from the World Health Organization. It says, age-friendly environments foster healthy and active aging. They enable older people to age safely in the place that is right for them, be free from poverty, continue to develop personally, and to contribute to their communities while retaining autonomy, health, and dignity. And I think we would all agree that that is a, something that we would all like to have happen. Oh, look, they go one by one. Okay, so the AARP age-friendly community has 8 life elements: building and outdoor spaces, transportation, housing, social participation, respect and social inclusion, civic participation and employment, communication and information, and community support and health services. Now, the CAA uses these 8 life elements to kind of plan and base our strategies on, I guess you would say. So we focus on, right now we're focused on 3 and 4 of those elements. Transportation is a huge one in our area, housing is a huge one in our area, and social participation is a huge one in our area. And then we've also kind of added advocacy to that. So we want to teach people how to advocate, and we want to advocate on behalf of seniors. I think social participation was part of our working groups before COVID, but I think if everybody gives it a little bit of thought, we realize how much social participation affects our mental health, and how devastated some seniors were when COVID disrupted that, right? Their social participation. So the next thing is the Charlottesville Area Alliance can be a resource for you, and I hope that you consider our age 65 and older population when voting for policies and initiatives. So I did a little sent a little question out to some of our members today, and I asked them how many years they had been working with the senior population. And I got responses from about 6 or 7 of them, and the total number thus far is 120 years. So there's a lot of experience working with the senior population, and they belong to the Charlottesville Area Alliance. I would strongly recommend, this is the CAA co-chair saying, I would strongly recommend that you use us as a resource. If you have a question that you want answered that involves the aging population, or first of all, think about the aging population in the policies and initiatives that you are working on now. And if you decide to do that and you have a question about it, call. You can call one of us, you can call me, you can call Sue, or you can send an email through our website, and we can provide you can see 120 years of experience to help you in that. Okay, that's basically what I have, and I just wanted to see if there was something that's on the future ballot that I can take back, or how we can really work together to have seniors be a priority. Because if you get seniors taken care of, then usually the people underneath them, the moms with the children, the dads with the children, the people that have walkability issues, usually those are taken care of as well.
Yeah, you may have listed them, but who are the members of the alliance? I just want to make sure some of the usual. Yeah.
Let me go back. There we go. There we go.
Yeah, that's why.
So they come, I mean, we have obviously people in the city of Charlottesville, but we consider our footprint, I guess you would call it, the Blue Ridge Health District. So there are people from Nelson, Fluvanna, other places. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
I got no questions.
Got no questions?
I'm part of your target market.
Yeah.
Getting there.
Yeah, we
Every
all
day.
are getting closer and closer. Okay. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
I hope you have a good
Thank you,
evening.
Kristen.
Thank you.
Okay, next item up is the Botanical Garden of the Piedmont. We have a,
Jill, I think Jill is.
walked away with a clicker.
Yeah, I did.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for inviting me here this evening to update you on what's going on with Botanical Garden of the Piedmont, give you a progress report of the past year, and a little insight into our plans for the near future. I want to take this opportunity to introduce Kanzi Palmer, who is the president of the board of directors of the Botanical Garden of the Piedmont. And many of you have had, we've had the pleasure of being able to invite you on a tour of the garden, and I hope that if you haven't been, that this afternoon's presentation will inspire you to come for a visit. You're all very welcome. So with that said, can I change the?
I don't know.
No. So if there's somebody listening, could they move to the next slide, please?
That clicker that she just brought back up.
Oh, okay. There we go. Oh. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. The mission is to welcome all community members and visitors to engage in nature, to educate and inspire through the beauty and importance of plants, to advance sustainability, and to promote human and environmental well-being. And this year we added core values to our organization, which is inspiring connection, learning, and joy through nature. And later in the presentation, I'll talk about how we are achieving our core values. Of course, fundraising is an important part of what we are doing right now to raise the funds to design, construct, and maintain the garden, as well as our operating fund. This year, for the first time, our operating fund exceeded our budgetary goals. Our operating fund was about $385,000. In addition, we're in the silent phase of our first capital campaign. The goal is $10 million. We started less than 2 years ago, and we're almost 50% of the way. In the past year, we did receive a 1-to-3 matching gift opportunity from the Perry Foundation. They offered us $250,000 if we could raise $750,000 in 12 months, and we met that goal in 6 months. So clearly our donors are motivated, and especially by challenge grants. We also have an amazing group of volunteer grant writers. In the past year, they wrote us 28 grants, of which we received 35%. These are generally small grants, but we are building a grant portfolio of being able to manage them. Some of them, like the photographs of the books in this picture, were grants that gave us books about nature and gardening that we use in our educational programming. But again, our grant writers are retired grant writers from UVA. All of them are scientists, and they're very motivated to support the garden, and we're so fortunate to have them. For those of you who haven't been here, just to orient you, the curved road at the bottom of the screen is the John Warner Parkway, and Melbourne Road goes up to the top right corner. The football stadium is on the right side of the screen. The railroad tracks are at the top, and then the creek along the left is, those are the boundaries for the garden. We have about 15 acres. A year ago, this schematic plan was unanimously approved by the City Council. Because the area on the bottom of our right-hand side of the site actually is owned by the city but falls within Albemarle County, we also had to go to Albemarle County to get their blessing on the schematic plan, and we received their unanimous approval as well. So we're now freed up to move the landscape design phase into the second phase of design for the garden, which is design development, and we're initiating that now. We also have hired a architecture firm to design our buildings, and the image you've seen here on the screen is the image that the community responded to in 2018 during our public feedback sessions about what the garden should be, what it should look like, what opportunities there should be on the site in terms of programming. This was the selection they chose. It's the visitor center for Walden Pond in Concord, Massachusetts. And Mary Ann Thompson, who is the architect of this building, is the architect that we selected for our buildings at the Botanical Garden. Since we saw you last, we started activating the site south of the stream. That area is not accessed through Melbourne Road because there's no bridge across the stream yet. Instead, you get there from the trails that you would access from the skate park. Along with invasive plant removal, Building Goodness Foundation has helped us build a kiosk in that area so that we can provide the same kind of information that's available on the north side of the stream. And we're continuing to build trails and gathering areas in that area so that we can start offering programming there soon. We also were able to negotiate a beautification lease with Norfolk Southern Railroad on the land that is adjacent to the Botanical Garden. The image that you see in the top left was what it looked like last August before we started stewarding the site. And then you can see subsequent progress photos of what it looks like. The bottom right is that it was just taken last week. So for only $300 a year, the Norfolk Southern is letting us pay them so that we can clean up their site. And we've been able to develop a little portion of that with an Eagle Scout project. And our plans are to create a meadow in that area at some point in the future. We've also enhanced the site with low to no cost amenities, most of them provided to us with donated materials and volunteer labor. We are trying to make the garden both welcoming and usable for the community now while we raise the funds to build the future garden. So we have several Eagle Scout projects pictured here. We've got benches, accessible picnic tables, a chalkboard, and then on the bottom you see the labyrinth that was just built by an Eagle Scout as her service project this May. The amphitheater is also used by for our programming. We have the Jefferson Madison Regional Library come one Wednesday a month for a preschool child story hour. And the books are always about nature and gardens, so their kids are learning about nature in nature. And the stream restoration is about to begin any day now, in fact, sometime this week. So in the upper row, you see the mulch path, and the bottom left, the trail the sign that directs people to get into the garden because access through the driveway gate will be closed for about a year. With all the improvements we've been able to achieve in the garden, we've been offering programming or continuing to offer the programs that we told you about last year in the arts, literacy, and STEM. We also, through our grants, have just been able to start developing a program in pollinators, and we're working with K-Tech to help us build native bee boxes for the garden. We also do outreach into the community. In the past year, just staff has provided 100 tours and Zoom presentations to different groups in the community, and that's not including the outreach that the board and our volunteers are doing. And then we also provide our spaces to outside groups so that they can use the garden for their programs as well. And of course, none of it would be possible without our amazing volunteers. And I'd like to count our board members amongst those volunteers who donate untold hours to, and unrecorded hours to service a project of this scale. We have everything from FAA licensed drone operators to editors and attorneys and teachers, and it's just incredible how the community has been supporting this project. So I spoke a little bit earlier about realizing our core values, inspiring connection, learning, and joy through nature. We are just so lucky to have this opportunity to provide a place like the Garden to such an amazing place like the city of Charlottesville and Central Virginia. All of the programs that we offer are open to the public and free of charge. We've worked with groups like in the Top Center, Parkside, who come every Friday morning and are doing volunteer labor in the Garden as part of a job training program. In I think it was late May, early June, we welcomed Clark Elementary. The entire second grade came and did a service project at the Garden and learned about invasive plants and helped us in the Garden by pulling stilt grass. It's early June, we had a program called Just Ask, where we partnered with Bennett's Village, who are building an accessible playground over at Penn Park. It was a celebration of everyone having accessibility to nature, regardless of their challenges, and the event was based on Chief Justice Sonia Sotomayor's book, Just Ask, about being a type 1 diabetic as a child and how that made her different, and how getting past those differences gives us an opportunity to realize how much we have in common. As a result of that event, we sent a presentation to Chief Justice Sonia Sotomayor, and she has offered to either come to Charlottesville to read her book to the community, or to, if she's unavailable, to do it on Zoom. So there's real life impacts that are happening by a lot of the collaborations that we've been able to do in the Garden with just our rustic amenities. And we have big plans for the near future. We're really excited about the stream restoration construction that's about to begin, which will follow with the construction of the bridge that will unite both sides of the Garden to one another, as well as the Garden to the trails along the John Warner Parkway and the skate park and beyond. Of course, I've already mentioned the design development phase of the landscape and beginning and this schematic plan for the visitor center and garden pavilion, and just continuing to steward the Garden and make it more welcoming and usable, and the new programs that are in our near future. So I appreciate this opportunity to talk to you, and I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Questions, council?
So if I live over in Locust Grove, if my wife and I were to drive over, I guess there's a parking lot, and we could get out and walk around, is it?
The parking area that's on the Garden is not official, so the
Okay.
Garden is open sunrise to sunset every
Okay.
day of the year. There is parking along Melbourne Road,
Okay.
and then the mulch trail, which the sign indicating that its location will bring you down into the Garden. We have an information kiosk with trail maps and the plans for the Garden, our latest newsletter, as well as other information. So
Do you
please
let
do
people
come
walk
down.
their dogs there?
People are welcome to walk their dogs. We ask that they clean up after them.
Okay.
This is
This is really brilliant, thank you.
thank you.
It was it's really changed since I've been going out there, and it was a lifesaver for many people during the pandemic when this outside was in, and I know people had board meetings out there, classes out there, so it's good to see the transformation. So thank you for your hard work.
How many butterflies you get this weekend?
Well, the butterflies were not that active on our walk, but we also had a yoga class in the Garden, and that was pretty inspiring. So there was a lot of tree frogs and bird activity, so it did feel very comforting to be there.
Any group that can take on kudzu has mine.
Did you bring the goats?
We were fortunate that our volunteers, once the opportunity arose to start cleaning, they just took it on as a personal challenge. So we haven't had to engage goats yet, but we do have some of that area on the south side of the stream where that's a possibility in the future.
Thank you for your outreach. One of my organizations was there I don't know, was it earlier this spring? And we really enjoyed our activity. And thank you to your volunteers for doing the tour. One of our neighbors is very involved with the botanical garden, so anything that's happening at the garden, our listserv is made aware of. So
great.
thank you, Mary. And Deborah Bell Burks made arrangements for the Charlottesville chapter of the Lynx to do our activity there earlier this year, and we really had a lovely time. And for those of you that are listening, I think we had to make a bouquet, and we put it in the little, not ginger jars, but whatever the jars are called. And mine are now dried. So I now have a dried floral arrangement. I forgot to water it a couple of days, and it just dried out, but it's very pretty and it's holding up. So that's my nature activity. So thank you very much, because it's a lovely facility. It's a good place to go just to sit and collect your thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that left a good memory for you.
Yep, thank you.
Jill, I recall that you all found some rather unique trees and things out there that, as they were
Yeah.
clearing, or, that you found some unique trees out there.
Yeah. So the site was a former leaf dump and mulch pile for the city of Charlottesville.
Right.
You might remember that. And it sat idle for about 10 years before we started stewarding, which gave the weed seeds a lot of opportunity to germinate and take over. When we first started stewarding, we had to hire a forestry mulcher to penetrate into the thicket of vegetation to see what was there. And we've been very fortunate in the support that we've gotten from Bartlett tree experts. They were there for our first volunteer effort, and they were cutting the vines on the bark of these trees along the bark, and realized that there were trees they didn't recognize there. The trees were butternuts, also called white walnuts. There was a fungus that went through in the 1990s and killed the majority of those trees in this area. And when the arborists realized what this tree was, they removed all of the vines, all of the dead woods. They cleared the canopy over these trees to give them every opportunity to not just survive, but to thrive. And a few years later, now they're fruiting. And we think that the reason that they survived was because they were so covered with these invasive vines that the fungus couldn't get through, it couldn't penetrate. And now, because there are so few butternut trees available, there are no vectors, and we're hoping that these living dinosaurs that we have in the garden will continue to thrive, and that we might be able to germinate them and
That's
share the
amazing.
wealth. Isn't it amazing?
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and I just want to say one thing, that I have always been impressed by the Botanical Garden for how it has done what it has done without doing what so many people do and coming to the city and saying, now you got to give us $100,000 or whatever the amount of money might be. There are a number of folks who have commented that there are a lot of organizations that we end up supporting where we sort of grouse, can't you all do some of your own fundraising? And you all do your own fundraising and do it very well, and that I appreciate that.
Well, thank
We're
you.
happy to arrange the lease for you to then let you go forth and do your thing.
Go
And
forth
the-
and multiply.
And it was very helpful. The community did respond when we became a little bit more independent from the city. But if there was one thing that we could ask your help for, we are still actively trying to build a case to get a bus stop to the garden. Because we can say that we're a place that's accessible and welcoming to everyone, but if they can't get there, then we're not walking the talk. I do have some volunteers who are helping me do some research. We were told by CATS that it wasn't a build it and they will come kind of situation. If we had to prove the need for a bus stop, and it's hard to prove something when you don't have it. So with the help of some volunteers, we have researched botanical gardens in other university cities throughout the country and are looking at those that are served by buses to try to find out what kind of traffic they're getting to their botanical gardens. So I'm hoping that when we have that research, I can come back to you to get some guidance on how best to use that to try to work a bus stop into that general area, because it would be to the benefit also of Charlottesville Football Stadium, Charlottesville High School, and the trails along John Warner Parkway.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that concludes our 4 o'clock agenda. We're a little bit early, but shall we move on to the closed meeting portion? Somebody got the motion to read?
I do indeed.
Okay.
This is a motion for City Council closed session. I move that City Council close this open meeting and convene a closed meeting as authorized by the Code of Virginia, Section 2.2-3711A3. Discussion or consideration of the acquisition of real property for a public purpose or the disposition of publicly held real property, where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiation strategy of the council. Specifically, discussion of prospective real estate transactions for the Sugar Hollow Reservoir and the proposed 0 East High Street development. In Section 2.2-3711A8, consultation with the city attorney regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice, specifically legal matters regarding the proposed Sugar Hollow Reservoir real estate transactions and the proposed 0 East High Street development.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Cast your vote. Is it? Motion passes 5-0. All right, we are now in closed meeting. We will return at 6:30. If anybody still paying attention, see you in an hour and 15 minutes. Thank you.